Hello, and welcome to Culture Corner. I'm Sanjay, an organization culture enthusiast who's all about exploring what makes teams tick, thrive, and sometimes trip up along the way.
And I'm Daisy. I'm obsessed with understanding how great cultures are built and, let's be honest, how they can be fixed when things go sideways.
Together, we're here to unpack the good, the bad, and the downright baffling about workplace culture.
From leadership strategies to the small stuff that makes a big difference, we've got it covered.
So whether you're a leader, a team player, or just someone trying to survive that Monday meeting, you're in the right place.
Let's dive into the heart of what makes organizations work or not. But it's notoriously tricky to get a handle on organizational culture.
Yeah?
We've got a fascinating set of insights here, mainly from a detailed technical report by a company called Culturelytics. They're using some pretty smart AI to try and bring some clarity to this, complex area.
It's definitely shifted, hasn't it? From being sort of on the sidelines to being like a central part of business strategy now.
Absolutely.
And the evidence is quite compelling. Deloitte's 2023 study, for instance, showed companies with strong cultures were like 2.5 times more likely to see high revenue growth.
2.5 times.
Yeah, and then you look at M&A, mergers and acquisitions, which are already risky.
Right, notoriously so.
Over 80% fail, apparently. And get this, a huge chunk, like 30% of those failures are directly linked to cultures clashing.
Wow, 30%. That really drives home the bottom line impact, doesn't it?
It really does.
It shows culture isn't just, about feeling good. It's fundamental,
Like,
especially when companies are going through big changes like mergers.
Exactly. And the pressure to get culture right feels, more intense than ever, I think.
Yeah, definitely. You've got hybrid work models to navigate, a bigger focus now on well-being, a diversity, equity, inclusion.
Right.
Plus, different generations in the workforce often expect different things, and companies need to be agile, right? Culture kind of underpins all of that.
It really does. And even regulators are noticing. In the UK, listed companies now have to actually assess their cultures.
Oh, interesting.
It shows there's this growing understanding that culture is, a tangible thing that affects success and risk.
But it feels intangible. That's the problem, right? Hard to grasp, hard to manage effectively.
That's a classic challenge. The old, you can't manage what you don't measure line feels spot on here.
Yeah. I mean, traditional things like engagement surveys, they give you some insight, but maybe they lack that real-time objective view.
Often, yeah. And that's where this approach from Culturelytics, the one we're digging into, seems to offer something new, using AI.
Right. So bringing data, bringing objectivity to something usually seen as, soft.
Exactly. Their platform uses things like natural language processing, NLP, to understand text.
Okay.
Sentiment analysis to figure out the emotions behind the words. Yeah. Machine learning to spot patterns. It's all about getting a more dynamic, evidence-based picture of what's really going on culturally.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is basically to explore how Culturelytics uses AI to decode culture and, ultimately help companies use it for real strategic advantage.
Sounds good.
So let's start at the beginning. Where did this idea even come from? What problem were they first trying to sort of solve?
Well, it seems the starting point was really those M&A failures we just mentioned.
Right, the 80% failure rate.
Yeah, that staggering number. And knowing that cultural clashes were behind almost a third of them, that pointed to a big gap. There just weren't good tools for what they call culture due diligence. Properly assessing if two company cultures could actually mesh before the deal was done.
That makes total sense. You can check the finances, the legal stuff, down to the last detail.
Right.
But figuring out if the people and the ways of working will fit together, that's much harder.
Exactly. So it sounds like they went straight to the source. They talked to VCs, private equity folks, investment bankers, heads of corporate strategy.
The people actually doing the deal?
The people in the trenches, yeah. And that groundwork led to a report they did back in 2020, specifically on culture's impact on M&A.
Okay.
And that really highlighted the need for better ways to measure and understand culture in that high-stakes M&A context.
So they spotted this very practical need from the business world. But they didn't just stop there, did they? They looked at existing theories, too.
No, they built on existing knowledge. They consulted organizational behavior experts, and they incorporated ideas from established models.
Like?
Well, they mentioned Barrett's value center model that links organizational values to human needs.
Okay.
And they drew on a Harvard framework for well-being, the one with 8 dimensions, plus concepts from organizational network analysis. ONA.
Right, looking at how people are connected.
Yeah, the informal networks. Though they don't name the specific ONA models they used, but the point is they weren't starting from scratch. They were building on solid foundations.
And it seems like they're still doing research, still refining things.
Yeah, they mentioned ongoing work. A study with KPMG India during COVID looked at things like support, well-being, engagement. And more recently, one with the Institute of Directors in India about the board's role in managing culture.
And what did that find?
Interestingly, it found widespread agreement that culture is important, but a real lack of clarity on how boards should actually oversee it effectively.
That echoes the challenge we talked about. How do you manage the intangible? Okay, so all this research, this groundwork, it led to their unique framework. And a key part of that seems to be measuring how culture aligns with specific business goals.
Yes, exactly. That's a core differentiator for Culturelytics.
Yeah.
They're not just measuring culture in a vacuum.
Right.
Their main focus is, does the current culture help or hinder achieving the organization's stated objectives?
That makes it much more business relevant.
Absolutely. They even cite a Harvard Business Review study from 2022 suggesting companies with high cultural alignment outperform others by 33% in areas like retention and innovation.
33%. That's a strong case for focusing on alignment. So how do they actually measure this? How do they put a number on it?
They developed something called the Culture Coherence Quotient, or CCQ.
CCQ. Yeah.
It's basically an overall percentage score. High score means good alignment culture supports the goals. Low score means misalignment culture is probably getting in the way, maybe hurting engagement or performance.
So it's like a cultural health check score.
Kinda, yeah. A periodic check on how aligned the culture is with where the company wants to go.
Okay, CCQ is the headline number, but what feeds into that? What are the components they're actually looking at?
Right, the CCQ comes from their A-line culture assessment framework. It has 8 dimensions.
8. Okay, let's break them down. What's the first one?
First is values alignment. This looks at how employees' personal values line up with what they see as the current company values and also what they want the future values to be.
How do I measure that?
Through a survey using a list of about 60 different values. It helps identify where there's agreement or maybe tension between individual and organizational values.
Makes sense. Understanding that potential gap. Okay, dimension 2.
Second is influencer network analysis. This tries to map out the informal networks. Who do people actually go to for advice or influence?
Not just looking at the org chart.
Exactly. The survey asks people to name colleagues they turn to in about 6 key areas. It identifies those informal influencers who often really shape the culture day to day.
Interesting. Finding the real cultural drivers. What's number 3?
Third is the leadership pulse. This zeroes in on the leadership team. How aligned are they on values? How adaptable do employees see them? Are they promoting the company effectively? What's their influence like?
So checking if leadership is aligned and, well, walking the walk.
Precisely. It uses mostly the same survey questions, plus one extra just for leaders. Crucial to see if leaders are perceived as embodying the desired culture.
Absolutely critical. Okay, dimension 4.
That's the adaptability quotient, or AQ. It measures the organization's readiness for change.
How do they measure readiness?
It's actually an inferred score, not a direct question. They derive it from the values data, the ENPS score, Employee Net Promoter Score.
Right, likelihood to recommend the company.
Yeah. And also an overall mood or sentiment indicator from employees. It gives a sense of the organization's overall agility.
Okay, so it's a composite score reflecting change readiness. What about the next 2? They seem to look outwards.
They do. Number 5 is people speak. This is all about the company's online employer reputation.
Like on Glassdoor and sites like that.
Exactly. They scan various employee review platforms, social media, etc., to see what current and former employees are saying publicly. It's that external perception piece.
Which is so important for attracting talent now.
Hugely.
Yeah.
And number 6, impressions, builds on that. It looked at the employer reputation compared to competitors.
Ah, the competitive landscape.
Yeah. They do a similar scan of competitors' online presence and the industry generally. It helps the company see how they stack up in the talent market. Are they attracting or repelling potential hires compared to others?
Got it. Understanding your relative position. Okay, number 7.
7 is well-being. And they take a pretty broad view here.
Beyond just physical health.
Oh, yeah. Physical, intellectual, emotional, social, occupational, financial, even spiritual and environmental aspects.
Wow, comprehensive.
Usually they work with the client to pick maybe the 4 most relevant dimensions for their context and measure those via the survey. It recognizes that a healthy culture supports the whole person.
That wider view is important. Okay, and the last one, number 8.
The final one is the culture needs scorecard. This is where they try to estimate the financial impact of any cultural misalignment found.
Connecting culture to cost.
Exactly. Using a proprietary formula, they translate cultural issues identified in the other dimensions into potential business costs, things like lost efficiency, impact on hitting revenue targets.
That's powerful, taking it from fuzzy feelings to dollars and cents, potentially.
Right. It helps make the business case for investing in culture change.
So this whole A-line framework sounds incredibly thorough. It really moves beyond just anecdotes to data, right?
Definitely. And they use that traffic light system you mentioned, red, amber, green, for each dimension.
To help prioritize.
Yeah. It quickly flags the areas needing the most urgent attention. Where's the culture most misaligned or acting as a barrier?
Okay, so we have this framework, this CCQ score. But how do they actually analyze all the data they collect? What's the engine running behind the scenes?
Good question. Collection is one thing. Analysis is where the magic, or rather the science, happens. It starts with qualitative stuff, interviews with leaders.
To define those strategic objectives we talked about.
Exactly. You need to know what you're aligning to. Then comes the quantitative data.
Which includes?
HRAS data demographics, so you can slice the data by different groups. Then the main employee survey that feeds most of those A-line dimensions. And they stress this is smart, data collection efficient, not too intrusive. Importantly, they focus on data people actively provide, not passively scraping things like emails.
Okay. And they also gather that external data independently?
Right. That scan of Glassdoor, LinkedIn, etc. for both the company and its competitors. That gives the outside-in view.
And companies can add financial data too.
Optionally, yes. To make that culture needs scorecard even more specific, linking cultural factors directly to financial outcomes if the data is available.
Okay, so they gather this rich mix of data. How do they then, crunch the numbers for each dimension? Let's start with values alignment.
For values, they use established models like Barrett's, as we mentioned. They use techniques like semantic clustering to group similar values people mention.
Okay.
They calculate things like value entropy, how much agreement or disagreement is there, and then analyze the alignment between personal, current, and desired values. It paints a picture of the value landscape.
Really digging into the underlying value system. What about influencers, the network analysis? That sounds different.
It is. They use graph theory and social network analysis concepts.
Right.
Mapping connections, calculating centrality metrics to see who's most connected or influential. It reveals those informal networks, the hidden wiring of the organization.
Understanding who really moves the needle, culturally speaking? Okay. And the leadership pulse.
There, they analyze leadership alignment on values, adaptability scores, promoter orientation are leaders' advocates. They also map variances. Where do leaders differ from the broader employee base?
Identifying those leader-employee perception gaps must be key.
Crucial for credibility. Then for the adaptability quotient, AQ.
Which is inferred, you said.
Right. It's derived by analyzing patterns across the values data, ENPS scores, and general sentiment. They're looking for signals related to innovation, responsiveness, resilience to gauge that overall change readiness.
Okay. And well-being, given its multiple facets.
They look holistically across the chosen dimensions. Are there patterns? High stress in certain areas, risk factors for burnout. They track trends over time to understand the workforce's overall health from those angles.
Got it. Now, those external ones, impressions and people speak, that must be heavy on the NLP, right?
Absolutely. That's where natural language processing really comes into play, analyzing all that text from review sites.
What does it pull out?
Key themes people are talking about, the overall sentiment, positive, negative, neutral, specific narratives about the company, leadership, credibility. It's like an unfiltered external focus group.
A real-time pulse on the external brand. And finally, the culture needs scorecard, turning all this into a financial estimate.
Yeah, that pulls everything together. It calculates a culture risk indicator, or CRI, quantifying the level of risk based on the misalignments found.
Okay.
Then, using models and benchmarks related to turnover costs, productivity impacts, brand damage, etc., they estimate the potential financial hit.
Wow.
They even have specific factors for M&A contexts, like a performance variance factor for integration risk, or a value adjustment factor to potentially adjust deal pricing based on cultural risk.
So not just identifying problems, but estimating the cost of not fixing them. And all these dimension scores feed the main CCQ score.
Exactly. The CCQ is a weighted average of all 8, statistically derived. It's normalized so you can track it over time. And crucially, it's tuned to the organization's specific context and strategy.
It sounds incredibly data intensive. The report lists a whole load of techniques they use.
Yeah, it's a sophisticated toolkit. NLP, obviously. Multivariate statistical modeling regressions, correlations, factor analysis, composite indexing for the CCQ itself, graph theory for the networks, predictive modeling forecasting risk, longitudinal analysis for trends, clustering to identify employee personas. It's quite comprehensive.
And they benchmark this against a large data set.
They do. They mentioned using data from over 6,000 companies, 24 sectors, 60 countries. That helps ground the analysis, provides context, and informs the weighting of the CCQ.
Okay, so a very rigorous analytical process. But with all this complexity, how do they actually ensure it's accurate? How do they know they're measuring culture reliably and validly?
That's absolutely critical, isn't it? Especially for something as nuanced as culture. They stress that the CCQ is empirically validated, built on reliable inputs and transparent scoring.
So let's talk reliability first. Consistency. How do they check that?
They use a standard statistical test called Cronbach's alpha. It measures internal consistency, basically. Do the different parts of the assessment hang together and measure the same underlying thing? They report an overall score of 0.70, which is generally considered good reliability.
Okay, so the tool measures consistently. But validity, is it measuring the right thing? Is it actually measuring culture and alignment? How do they establish that?
They take a multi-layered approach to validity. First is construct validity, meaning is the tool grounded in established theory? Does it align with accepted models of organizational behavior like Barrett's or Maslow's hierarchy or general OB principles? They use statistical methods like factor analysis to confirm their 8 dimensions behave as theory would predict.
So it's theoretically sound. What else?
Then there's content validity.
Yeah.
Do the survey questions and indicators actually cover the important aspects of culture? They worked with experts to design the items and tested them to make sure they capture the domain comprehensively and minimize bias.
Making sure the questions are good, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
Then, crucially, criterion validity.
How does that work?
This looks at whether the CCQ scores actually correlate with real-world outcomes we'd expect culture to influence. Things like employee turnover, ENPS scores, employer brand ratings, maybe even productivity data were available.
So does a good score actually link to good results?
Exactly. Finding those correlations provides strong evidence that the tool is measuring something practically meaningful.
That seems very important. Any other validation aspects?
Yes. They also talk about real-world validation. Basically, do employees and leaders who use the platform find the insights credible and useful? Does it resonate with their experience? That practical acceptance is another layer of validation.
Okay, so it sounds like a pretty robust process covering reliability and different facets of validity. And driving all this, especially the real-time predictive parts, is AI. Let's dig into how AI specifically powers this.
Right. AI, machine learning, NLP, LLMs, they're really central to what makes their approach different. It enables that depth, the multidimensional view, and the predictive element.
So tell me more about the NLP and the large language models. How are they used day to day?
They're key for analyzing all that text data. Internally, think open-ended survey comments, feedback from internal chats, maybe even transcripts from conversational AI tools if used.
So understanding what people are actually saying, not just clicking a rating?
Exactly. Going beyond the numbers to get the nuance, the themes, the sentiment, the values expressed in people's own words. And externally, as we said, using NLP LLMs to process the huge volume of text on review sites like Glassdoor, Indeed, etc.
Giving that outside-in perspective on the culture.
Precisely. Comparing the internal reality with the external perception.
Okay, so NLP handles the text. What about machine learning, ML? Where does that fit?
ML is crucial for the predictive side. By analyzing historical patterns in the data, ML models can forecast potential culture shifts, maybe identify risk nodes, parts of the organization where disengagement might be growing.
So spotting potential problems before they blow up.
That's the idea. ML can also correlate things like network influence with sentiment trends. And it powers the culture needs scorecard learning the relationships between cultural metrics and business outcomes to estimate that financial impact.
And you mentioned the CCQ weighting is dynamic. Is ML involved there too?
Yes, absolutely. The weighting of those 8 dimensions isn't fixed. ML algorithms adjust it based on context, the company's industry, size, maturity, current strategy.
So the score reflects what's most important now for that specific company.
Exactly. A post-merger company might have different cultural priorities weighted more heavily than a stable, mature business, for example.
Makes sense. And AI helps with the benchmarking too, you said.
Yes. Analyzing public data with AI allows for more nuanced benchmarking against peers and industry leaders than just looking at generic averages. You can track reputation volatility, identify perception gaps. Maybe Gen Z feels differently about the company than older workers, for instance.
Giving much more targeted comparisons. Now, with all this AI capability, explainability and ethics are huge topics. How do they address that?
They emphasize model interpretability, making it clear how scores are derived, especially the risk indicators. Data anonymization is key for privacy and GDPR compliance. They also mention bias audits on their algorithms and transparency about data sources and logic. It's about building trust in the AI's output.
That's reassuring. Okay, so the analysis is done. The AI has crunched the numbers. What does a CCQ score actually tell an organization, and how do they use it?
So each of the 8 dimensions gets a score, typically 1 to 10. But the key isn't just the number itself, or even comparing it to an industry benchmark.
What is the key then?
It's comparing the score against the organization's own strategic goals and desired culture. Is the current culture aligned with where leadership wants to go? That's the main interpretation.
And the traffic lights help visualize that alignment. Green, amber, red.
Exactly. Green means strong alignment culture is likely helping achieve goals. Amber means moderate alignment. Some areas need attention, maybe proactive intervention. Red means low alignment culture is likely hindering progress, needs focused action.
So it's about tracking your own progress against your own goals over time.
Yes. Assessing progress against yourself is more meaningful than chasing external benchmarks.
Okay, so how does this insight translate into action? What do HR or leaders do with this?
It provides concrete input for things like leadership development. You can tailor training to address specific cultural gaps shown in the data, reinforce desired behaviors.
Makes sense.
It also guides broader culture enhancement strategies. You prioritize fixing the red zone issues, maybe take preventative action on amber zones, and figure out how to leverage the strengths in the green zones. It gives you a data-driven roadmap.
And the report mentions specific types of recommendations.
Right. They usually fall into 3 buckets. Initiatives like specific programs to promote values or boost engagement. Process improvements, maybe tweaking onboarding or performance reviews to align better with the culture. And policy updates, changing formal rules to reflect cultural priorities.
And they use dashboards and demographics.
Yeah, to help target these actions. You can see if certain departments or employee groups are experiencing the culture differently and tailor interventions accordingly.
So a very practical, targeted approach to change. Now, handling all this sensitive employee data obviously raises privacy and ethical questions. How do they manage that?
They outline a pretty comprehensive data protection policy. Strong security measures, encryption, access controls, anonymization where possible, regular audits.
Okay.
Clear rules on data sharing restricted internally, compliant if transferred externally, and importantly, data retention limits personal data deleted, usually within a month after project completion. Plus, breach management plans.
Sounds thorough on the data security front. What about the broader ethics, beyond just keeping data safe?
Their ethical framework covers several principles. Informed participation, people know why data is being collected. Non-discrimination, trying to ensure fairness and inclusivity, reviewing algorithms for bias. Integrity and analysis, reporting objectively, transparently. Respecting confidentiality and the client's autonomy. Responsible AI use, obviously. And fundamentally, a human-focused approach, prioritizing well-being and trust.
Good to hear those principles are core. The report also shows this isn't just theoretical, it's being used in the real world.
Definitely. They stress it's applicable across sectors and geographies for different challenges. They even have 5 specific assessment products for different needs engagement, M&A integration, etc.
And they give some examples of outcomes.
Yeah, quite a few diverse ones. Helping a global steel company use data for people processes during growth. Predicting a potential financial target miss for an Indian bank post-acquisition due to culture clashes.
Wow, predicting a miss.
Improving well-being in a Middle East government body. Smoothing a big acquisition integration for an infrastructure company. Helping a manufacturing firm shift to a B2C mindset. Even enhancing well-being for a remote workforce at an international lender.
Those are really varied examples showing the range of applications. Okay, but how does this Culturelytics CCQ stack up against other well-known tools like Gallup Q12 for engagement or McKinsey's OHI for organizational health?
They provide a comparison chart, which is helpful. It looks at things like the main focus, the dimensions measured, methodology, output, customization, benchmarking approach, and actionability.
And what are the main takeaways from that comparison? How do they differentiate themselves?
They position the CCQ as being for organizations that want that deep AI-driven diagnostic, specifically focused on strategic alignment.
Right.
So while Gallup Q12 is laser-focused on engagement and McKinsey OHI gives a broader health check, CCQ's niche is using AI for predictive insights about how well culture supports specific strategic goals. It emphasizes high customization and AI-driven actionability.
So it's perhaps a more specialized predictive tool for strategic culture alignment.
That seems to be the positioning, yeah, leveraging AI for deeper diagnostics than traditional surveys might offer.
Okay. Lastly, they acknowledge some limitations and talk about future directions. It's always good to see that self-awareness.
Absolutely. They're realistic. Capturing all cultural nuance is hard. External data isn't always perfectly available. Culture changes, sometimes fast. Multinational companies add complexity. And mapping influencers still relies partly on surveys.
But they see these as reflecting reality, not necessarily flaws.
Kinda, yeah. Reflecting the complexity of human behavior.
And where are they looking to go next? What's in development?
Deeper causal modeling. Really understanding cause and effect between culture and outcomes, more industry-specific models, integrating more passive data sources, potentially. Real-time culture sensing, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Developing better metrics for inclusion and intersectionality, and improving their multilingual NLP for global accuracy.
So constantly trying to refine and expand. Okay, let's wrap this up. What's the main takeaway from this deep dive into Culturelytics and their approach?
I think the core message is they're really trying to elevate culture management to be more scientific, more data-driven, more strategic, moving it beyond guesswork or just gut feeling.
And the key strengths, CC?
Fusing internal and external data is a big one. Quantifying culture through the CCQ and A-line gene framework. Using AI to translate qualitative feedback into intelligence. Estimating that financial impact the culture needs scorecard. And enabling proactive, targeted action. It's that blend of rigor and hopefully a human-centric focus.
Using data and AI to help leaders actively shape culture for strategic results.
Exactly. It points towards a future where organizations don't just react to their culture, but intentionally design, measure, and lead it to achieve their goals.
That's a powerful vision. So here's a final thought for you, our listener. How could a deeper, data-backed understanding of your organization's culture unlock hidden potential, or maybe mitigate some unseen risks on the path to your strategic objectives? What steps could you maybe explore to move beyond the traditional, maybe less objective ways of looking at your workplace culture? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.